from a race massacre to political violence. Here are some of the most violent towns in the U.S. Number 1. Tulsa, Oklahoma. In 1921, the Tulsa Race Massacre, also known as the Greenwood Massacre, took place in Tulsa, Oklahoma. This event is considered one of the most horrific incidents of racial violence in United States history. The massacre happened in the predominantly black neighborhood of Greenwood, which was also known as Black Wall Street because of its many successful black-owned businesses. On May, a white mob attacked the neighborhood, killing hundreds of black residents and burning down thousands of homes and businesses. It is estimated that over 300 black people were killed, and 6,000 were left homeless after their homes and businesses were destroyed by the mob. Mainstream historians largely ignored the event for many years, but in recent decades, there has been a growing movement to remember and honor the victims of the massacre, and to seek reparations for the black community of Tulsa. No to Charlottesville, Virginia. Charlottesville is a city in Virginia that has a history of racial violence. In August of 2017, a white supremacist rally turned deadly when a man identified as a neo-Nazi rammed his car into a group of killing 32-year-old Heather Heyer. The incident was part of a larger movement by white supremacists to protest the removal of Confederate statues and symbols from public spaces. The violence in Charlottesville brought national attention to the issue of race relations in the United States and the persistence of white supremacy in American society. Number 3. Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta, Georgia has a long history of racial violence and tension. One of the most notable incidents occurred in 1906 when a white mob lynched two black men, Leo Frank and Tom Watson, after they were accused of raping a white woman. The Atlanta Massacre of 1906 was a significant event in the history of racial violence in the United States. The killings sparked outrage and grief among black Americans, who had been subjected to racial terror and violence for centuries. The Atlanta Massacre became a rallying cry for civil rights activists who sought to end the violence and discrimination against black people in the South. No. For Los Angeles, California. Los Angeles, California has a long and complex history of gang violence, particularly among the city's many different ethnic groups. One of the most notorious instances of gang violence in Los Angeles history occurred in 1992 when 4 white police officers were acquitted in the beating of Rodney King, a black motorist. The acquittal sparked a week of rioting and civil unrest that resulted in more than 50 deaths and billions of dollars in property damage. The Rodney King riots were a watershed moment in the history of race relations in Los Angeles and California as a whole. The riots highlighted the deep racial tensions that existed in the city and the state, and led to calls for police reform and greater accountability. No. Boston, Massachusetts has a long and complex history that includes several instances of political violence. One of the most notable instances of political violence in Boston as history occurred in 1912, when a group of Italian anarchists threw bombs at the Preparedness Day parade, which was attended by many prominent government officials, including Mayor John F. Fitzgerald, who survived the attack. The bombing was part of a larger movement by anarchists across the country to protest the increasing militarization of American society and the role of the federal government in domestic affairs. The Preparedness Day bombings were a significant event in the history of political violence in Boston and had a profound impact on the city's political landscape. The bombings led to a crackdown on anarchist and labor groups and contributed to the rise of a more conservative political climate in Boston and the rest of the United States. Number 6. Chicago, Illinois. Chicago, Illinois has a long and complex history that includes several instances of political violence. One of the most notable instances of political violence in Chicago history occurred in 1968. During the Democratic National Convention, a group of anti-war protesters gathered to demonstrate against the Vietnam War and other issues. However, the protests turned violent when police clashed with the protesters and several people were injured. The violence at the 1968 Democratic National Convention was part of a larger movement by anti-war protesters across the country to bring about an end to the Vietnam War and to protest other aspects of American foreign policy. The violence in Chicago brought national attention to the issue of the Vietnam War and to the growing anti-war movement in the United States. Number 7. New Orleans, Louisiana. New Orleans, Louisiana has a long and complex history that includes several instances of racial violence and social unrest. One of the most notable instances of racial violence in New Orleans History occurred in 1866 when a group of white supremacists, known as the Crescent City White League, attacked the city's black and white Republican leadership. The attack was part of a larger movement by white Southerners to regain control of state governments that had been lost to the Republicans during the Reconstruction era following the Civil War. The New Orleans riot was a significant event in the history of racial violence in the United States. The riot resulted in the deaths of dozens of African Americans and the wounding of many more, and it contributed to the end of Reconstruction in the South. Thank you for watching. If you want to learn more about these topics, check out the provided resources.